All right, I'd like to call the committee of the whole meeting for Monday, July 17th, 2023 to order. Roll call, please.
Mayor Gaffino.
Here.
Trustee Christensen.
Here.
Trustee Curtis. Trustee Gately.
Here.
Trustee Lowry.
Here.
Trustee Nedved.
Here.
Trustee Salazar. Here.
Audience comments? Trustee comments? First item under discussion, Steve?
Thank you, Mayor. First item on discussion is mobile food vendor code amendments. Recently went as a workshop to the committee of the whole, and along with special event code, they're both coming back for approvals in August, unless there are some issues tonight with the way we revised it. But basically, in the memo that's lined out, the significant questions we asked were, do you still need a mobile food vendor permit? And it sounded like, based on the fact that no one was really getting the permit and that they have to get registered to the county, we took that section out of the code and now rely on the county's permit. Still says you need a county permit in our code. And then the Route 31 exemption, allowing food trucks to prepare food for brick and mortar businesses. We've never had anyone ask for it ever since we put it in. So at this point, we've decided to take it out. So that has been revised from the code. And then the amount of time and days, the board left it as 2 days a week, no more than 8 hours. So that's what the new code reflects. So it gives, and we did find out that some businesses were already doing that. So it turns out that that's actually something that a lot of businesses that don't have a kitchen do on weekends to bring people into their establishments. The only other changes that to highlight, if anything, like 2/3 of the code is going away, which makes it actually easier to regulate. We did add a definition for mobile food apparatus because the way the code was written, everything was written that a vendor, which is the person actually selling, would be the one that was causing, the issues. A vendor cannot be on a location for more than X amount of time. But really, it's the property owner, too, who's responsible for not hiring 75 food trucks and just saying, okay, well, he's only been here one time, so he can come here one time, and I can get this guy to come here one time. And then you end up with 7 trucks throughout the week. So we broke it out. We now have a code for vendor, which is the person selling, and apparatus, which is the actual vehicle. And by doing that, we now say you can't have a vehicle on this property and no vendor shall sell on this property twice a week. For this way, you're covered either way, that at the most, it's going to be 2 days a week, 8 hours maximum on that property. The other thing we did put too was we added a line that says, no mobile food apparatus shall be the primary source of food preparation for a brick and mortar business. We've never had that question really come up where someone is actually using the food truck incorporated in their business. So we left it as, if you're a brick and mortar business, you have to have your own kitchen inside the establishment. And then the only other thing we added, so that there was clarification, the way it was written before, if you owned a brick and mortar business, it almost made it sound like you couldn't park your own truck on your property. So we wrote it in that if the food truck is part of your actual business, like you sell, chicken, and your chicken truck is parked in the parking lot, you're allowed to have your own truck in the lot, whether it's a food truck or not, because that's your business. So we left that there. We use the example in Batavia. There is a establishment near their downtown that parks food trucks, but they actually have a brick and mortar business. They just park their food trucks in the same lot when they're not using them. So those are the changes. Does anybody have any questions?
No, this looks right. Excellent.
Yeah.
Yep.
We went through this last time. Pretty good. Pretty thorough.
You good? Okay. All right. Thank you. Item 2, Steve.
Item number 2 is in regards to our updating of the human resources manual. In the human resources manual that we use, we update it periodically for multiple reasons. First, we use it to clean up language or clarify existing practices that have been in place for a while, and the language of the manual doesn't necessarily line up. So we bring it to the board. We take it seriously. So we try to follow the HR manual, to a T the best we can. So that's why we bring it back to the board for periodic updates, because we always want you to know that what we're doing with our staff, that you're comfortable, that you can talk to somebody in the public and tell them, no, I know that our people are doing this and this is what they're allowed to do, and that we have some oversight of that. That being said, the other thing too is we update the manual because government is historically behind in some cases. So what we look to do is try to update it so that we're at least comparing with other municipalities. And as you recall, we did the salary study earlier this year. And part of that was we adjusted some salary ranges to be so that in all of our comparables that we were going to be at least in the 50 percentile. We were at least paying our staff halfway up the salary ranges of all of our comparables. That comparable survey yielded a mix of what they call, I would call them true comparables on paper, population demographics, everything kind of lines up that our villages are similar. And then there was geographical comparables. These are towns in the Fox Valley area that if you were living in Geneva or Batavia and you wanted to work here, you might be looking at a similar job posting at St. Charles. So we wanted to also compare to them and see where we fell in that. By doing that, we end up coming up with some changes. Some of the changes in the manual are cleanup, and some of them are geared towards, I would say, recruitment and retention. A lot of it is recruitment, because what we're seeing today is there are less and less people applying for jobs. It is evident in the last several job postings that we have done at the village. And I'm talking from every position of the village, from starting entry-level positions all the way up to department head level positions. You're seeing the candidate pools dramatically smaller than they used to be. So in order to attract talent, and we've been very fortunate that we have, but I can tell you just in our last 2 executive recruitments for department heads, the number was shockingly lower than what you would have expected a few years ago. So with that being said, during those recruitments, sometimes you see what our comparables are offering, and then you try to match it a little bit. I know we had someone interested in our job for one of the jobs that we posted recently, and they were comparing specific things that we didn't have in our HR manual to the town they ended up accepting. So I know that that happens. Now with that, Jason's going to walk through some of the changes, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so the first section we're going to look at is section 2.9, drug-free workplace. If you're following along, if you have the manual that we attached, it's page 11. The first part of this, really not much changed here. Since now that cannabis is legal in Illinois, we took cannabis basically out of the section where, or illicit drugs. So now if you read the policy, it'll say illicit drugs, alcohol, cannabis, and other controlled substances. But basically what we're saying is we're just adding that to the list, pulling it out specifically, but employees still aren't allowed to manufacture, distribute, dispense, possess, or be under the influence of cannabis while they're at work, in a village facility, in a village vehicle. So really what we're doing is just pulling cannabis out of controlled drugs and just making it its own separate item. We've also added some additional language that mentions the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, drug and alcohol requirements for all the CDL employees, just kind of beefing that language up a little bit. So any employees performing, safety sensitive work or have CDLs, this doesn't apply to them. They always have, drug testing that's going to test you for cannabis, whether if it's illegal or not, or legal or not allowed. One thing we also did was, if you look at the policy, it makes mention of not having to have a alcoholic drink within 4 hours of reporting to work. It doesn't mention how many drinks, it just says nothing within 4 hours. So basically what we did is we took that language out, but now we're just saying any employee that's exhibiting signs of being under the influence, we'll send you home. Possible, discipline, could be, termination. So we're not limiting the number of hours. We're just saying if you even look like you have anything in you, we're sending you home. We're taking you out. So it doesn't matter how many alcoholic drinks or anything you've had. It could be one. If you're showing signs, you're going home.
And one interesting thing in our current manual, so the 4 hours I think comes from the CDL requirements. I think that's actually specifically in the public works contract. But what's interesting is there was a little parentheses in the HR manual that said unless authorized. And I was trying to figure out what that meant. And I think I thought of the scenario of, let's say you have a beer, it's a Friday night, the storms come through, but you only had one beer and it was within the last 2 hours. Are you going to tell, the head of public works, don't come in because, you've had one beer in the last 2 hours and we can handle this without you? That might be where the unless authorized comes in, like, yeah, Brian's fine. He doesn't exhibit any signs of impairment. You can come in, Brian. So I think that's why it was in there. But nevertheless, we just said, if you look like you're drunk, you're going to get sent home. And we just took the 4 hours out.
Okay, so the next section we're proposing changes is 4.3, the new hire rate. So that'd be on page 19. Currently, the village administrator can authorize a hiring point up to the midpoint. So if it were a non-union employee with our 10 step, they could go up to step 5. Anything over step 5 would have to come to the village board, get their consent to start that employee over step 5. So what our proposed change would be that the village administrator can start at any step within the range. So this would basically provide us more flexibility when hiring, so that we don't have to delay the hiring process by waiting for the next board meeting to go, to close session and get the consent of the board, so that maybe we make a candidate wait for a week, 2 weeks before we have an answer for them.
So this one comes from a couple things. One, in my tenure here, there's been times that I've gone to the board to ask for higher than the midpoint, and I've never had the board say that the person wasn't qualified. And Jason is a good example. Jason came over with several years experience as a finance director in another community already. Had Jason been a candidate for another town, and as I go back, we did have this recently occur, where it was timing is of the essence when you're between one village is very similar to us, and one person's offering a job and the other person says, I have to ask the board in 2 weeks if I can give you this money. So can you wait on this one that you're already being offered for 2 more weeks so that I can ask the board to say yes or no for this extra $5,000 or whatever it is.
Okay, the next section is 4.8 performance evaluation and salary increases on page 20. So our current policy says that step increases shall always be based on an employee's applicable anniversary date. So as part of the evaluation date, when you have your evaluation, if you have a satisfactory evaluation, you'd move up to the next step. We've updated this language to, rather than say always done, we're saying generally done. So for most everybody, it's just going to be the same practice. We're just taking that always out. But we did add language that proposes the village administrator is able to review any step increases that fall outside of an evaluation period. Example we kind of picture, say today an employee comes in and gets hired at step 1, and then maybe 2 years later, comparable employee doing a similar thing, they come in and they get hired at like a step 4. So now you've got an employee who followed along, who's been here for 2 years at a step 3, a new person at a step 4. They're doing similar experience, similar job titles. So this just allows us to kind of create that internal equity to where we're not having people fall out of line just because of the time in which they hired, and we're just making sure everything's kind of status quo on the inside. So the next one, section 6.3, lunch periods. This one kind of ties into that salary survey that we did months back. As part of that, we asked them not only to give us what all your positions are, what your salary ranges are, but we also asked for schedules and hours of work. Like how many hours do your employees work? What kind of break periods do they get, whether paid breaks, unpaid breaks. So we got about 19 back that we were able to look at kind of what other people were doing versus what we're doing. Currently, our non-union employees have a unpaid 30-minute break. So basically that equates to they're here for eight and a half hours. They get paid working for 8 hours, 40-hour work week. Of the 19 responses we got back, 4 have basically a similar what we have: 30-minute unpaid lunch, working 8 hours a day, 40-hour week. Of the 10 of the 19 indicated that the employees receive a 30-minute unpaid lunch and a 30-minute paid break, usually that they basically combined to do a 1-hour lunch. So basically, they're essentially working 7.5 hours per day, 37.5-hour work week. What we're proposing is to kind of, meet in the middle, have a 15-minute paid break. So basically, we would make people tie that into their unpaid lunch. So essentially a 45-minute lunch break, 30 minutes of it being unpaid, 15 minutes of being paid. This is a change we believe that would be effective in morale for employees, allowing them 45 minutes. So if they wanted to run home, they'd have plenty of time to travel home, have lunch, and then travel back rather than, I know where I live, at 30 minutes, I'd probably get home, walk in the door, grab something really quick, and get back in my car to drive back here in the day. There was one of our comparables of the 19 that's basically doing the exact same thing we're proposing with this 15-minute paid break to add on for the lunch.
And this one here, this is probably the number one thing that I've heard from the staff in my entire time with the village was about the lunch break. And Mandy, who handles our HR as our HR manager, she was here when the village actually had a different schedule going back to the early 2000s, like 2005-ish, around there when they did a salary study. And at that time, if I'm correct, the village actually employees worked effective work, meaning the actual hours of paid time was 37.5 hours, which is typically the norm from our comparables. Then it got up to employees went from 37.5 to 40-hour work weeks. And it was at that time that they ended up getting 2.5 hours more of time that they had to put in each day during that salary survey. So it was interesting. We actually switched the opposite way like 20 years ago. And now we're talking about meeting halfway, not going back to 37.5. Everybody essentially works a 38.75 hour work week, but they're basically here available for the 40. We're open for 42.5 hours of the week. The village would still remain open.
Section 6.8, flexible hours and remote work on page 39. Currently, the policy says the village administrator has the flexibility to approve differing work schedules, but we really don't get into any examples of kind of what that means. So our language we're proposing kind of, further defines kind of what we're talking about there. Any flexible remote work schedules intended to be short-term basis, 1 day here, 2 days there, something like that, but must have a clear benefit to the village as to why we're doing this. Some examples of this would be, maybe an employee has to come in an hour or hour late, but to make that up, they say, oh, I'm going to stay an hour on the back end of the day late. So I'm still going to work my same amount of hours. I just need a little flexibility to come in a little bit late, stay a little bit late, something like that. Or if you had the ability to work from home for, 1 day and say, I've got a service appointment coming to my house. It's probably going to be in the morning. I can work from home for a couple hours in the morning, but as soon as it's done, I'm going to come back into work and finish out the rest of my day in the office. So it's not really something that's meant to be long-term in nature. It's 1 day here, 2 days here, best case, but very short-term. Has to be agreed to by the village administrator and the department head that it can work. It's not going to disrupt operations here at the village.
As Jason said, it is very limited. So when you look at some of the examples he gave about deliveries as one, here's one that actually comes up once in a while. It's someone who's going to a conference or a seminar, and the seminar is at, let's say, 9 a.m. But instead of telling them to go straight to the seminar from their house, which might be 20 minutes away from the seminar, they may drive a half hour, 40 minutes to work to clock in at 8 o'clock and then leave from here to go to that seminar. Or in this case, we could just say, work from home for the first hour on your computer if you're eligible to do so, and leave from your house, and then just come back from the seminar when you're done. It's things like that, or the service appointments as it's not supposed to be for childcare. It's not supposed to be for sick time. If you have the flu, you can't call in and say, I'm really sick. I want to work from home today. No, you take sick time for that. It's just to give the rare cases of flexibility to the staff. Not everybody obviously is an eligible employee. The other thing too that we added that's different is after we came out of the COVID regulations, the idea of having any pandemic or quarantine or anything like that and having to be able to do any short-term remote work, we used to have to go to the board for it. But now if there is, let's say, a blizzard, or if someone is coming out of they're quarantining for whatever reason, it says it now in the HR manual that we can give them the short-term, okay, stay home for 2 more days, work from home. Oh, the blizzard's coming. You're driving an hour in. You can work from home today, potentially. We'll have enough people that are local that'll be able to staff the building. And it just gives us that flexibility.
And the last change we're proposing is section 10.7 service recognition on page 79. Our current policy mentions how if anybody who has 10 years of service with the village, village would provide food and beverages to have a little party for them up to $750. Just as the village is growing and just things are costing more, we're finding $750, to buy food and drinks for, retirement or going away parties for those employees is really getting tough to do that. So basically we're taking the $750 cap out of it. Obviously the intention is still to be within reason. We're not going out there and spending 3 times that. It might be under $750. It might be, $800, but to be able to buy stuff within reason and not go overboard. So we just want to take that cap out.
And that there was a caveat actually in the HR manual that said $750 or I believe approved by the village administrator if it goes over. So as I'm not going to rehash it, Jason already said, but we've grown. And so even like the police department, especially when someone retires from the police department, you would expect more people are going to show up because the police department has the most employees in the village. So when that happens and their family shows up, the last thing we want to do is be like $40 short of food. when you have 75 people coming. So we always try to order between 50 and 75 people roughly. So it just depends. Sometimes it's a little more.
Yeah, so that's all the changes that we got over. So if there's any questions or further clarification we need.
No, it looks good, guys. Very good.
Yeah, I'm good.
My only question would be, aren't employees supposed to be entitled to 2 15-minute breaks?
So our union contract for Public Works, they get 2 15-minute paid breaks. But non-union employees do not. By law, you just have to have a break. I believe it's actually 20 minutes. But we give them a 30-minute unpaid lunch. That is the break.
Got it.
But yes, a lot of towns do that. And I'm thinking, as Jason said, it's probably for internal equity that they give breaks because some of the other union contracts might have breaks built into them.
You good?
Very good.
All right. All right. Thank you. No exec session. Motion adjourn.
So moved. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, the same. Good night, everyone.
Okay.